It's that time of the week. It's Friday. The working week on here is almost over for me, and it is time for Free Speech Fridays. We get a couple of free-speaking New Zealand individuals. We chew over, kick round the events of the week, and we set ourselves up for the weekend. And it can be lighthearted, it can be serious. It should be fun, like the music suggests. And joining us, one guest, we're still on the phone to him. Ben is just trying to tee him up. They're both there now. And first up, a very warm welcome to Judith Collins, the national member for Papakura. Judith, how are you?
Oh, I'm excellent, thank you, Sean, and I hope you're well too.
Yeah, cracking along, thank you, Judith, cracking along. And from the jewel of the South, the finest municipality way down at the bottom of the South Island, the Mayor of Invercargill, none other than Nobby Clark. Nobby, how are you, mate?
Yes, very good team. How are you?
Great. All right, Judith, you can hear Nobby?
Yes, I can.
And Nobby, you can hear Judith. That's it. We are all together. Well, look, guys, because it's there, let's just start off quickly and get it out of the way. The budget, and I've done lots of budgets as a reporter. Nobby, it kind of leaves me a little cold. Do you think it makes much difference to the folk of Invercargill what happened at the lockup yesterday?
No, look, I think it's a very flat budget. It does little or nothing. It's just tinkering around the edges. It doesn't address some of our core issues. Core issues are the impact on low-income families and our poor educational standards and what have you.
Yeah, and you don't feel like anything really makes much change in any of those areas?
Well, I mean, when you hear reports that the government's, I think, funded about 50 or 60 or 70 truancy officers and only one of them's been employed in the country, and thinking building new classrooms is going to excite kids to go to school, it's a bit naive in some ways, I do feel.
Yeah, Judith, it's not much of a budget, really, is it? There's not much to write home about here.
Well, it's sort of a swan song, really, isn't it, for Grant Robertson? It's all about just splashing as much cash as they can, but at the same time borrowing as much as they possibly can. So given that we are going through really tough times as a country and most people are really worried about the cost of living and crime, there was nothing there about crime. There was very little about the cost of living. All they actually did is said that they were going to borrow more money, which is going to put more pressure on interest rates and therefore put more cost onto families.
Yeah, I guess, look, it's funny all week. I guess if there is a story that seems to encapsulate or which you could connect to all the issues you just mentioned, Judith, it was the Loafers Lodge fire. There's an arrest being made overnight. Arson, of course, suspected. The death toll 6 and rising. And the whole story brings into stark relief, I think, the social crisis in this country, and that people are living in places like that as some sort of lifestyle, and we have many of them not in places like that, but I think 8 people this morning in one location just outside the office of the platform here sleeping in the street rough. We have the housing crisis, we have an economic crisis and terrible results. Nobby, how do you feel about that Loafers Lodge fire? Does it tell us something disturbing about our country, our nation, in the year 2023?
It raises one quick immediate issue, is the issue of having water sprinklers in buildings like that, given that some of the clients, I guess you'd call as reasonably high risk. But it's a much wider issue. I mean, I think the issue of housing sits in the background. We've had housing issues for decades now. And a good example is I know people in Invercargill who are getting older, that might have lost a partner. They're sitting in a 3 or 4 bedroom house. They've got no way of getting out of that house because there's nowhere else for them to go. And what we haven't addressed is the need for smaller, more intense 2-bedroom units for people of my age that need to downsize and be able to get into it at a realistic price. Because without that, those people just continue to sit in family homes, which is what we actually need for a whole lot of other people as well.
Yeah.
So,
Judith, do you think it is indicative of wider problems in our society, or is it just a fire?
Well, no, it is indicative of wider problems. So you've got many of those people at that particular place, which sounds like it's really sort of what's known as a halfway house, would be people who have some very major issues, mental health issues, the whole works, criminal issues, or just are very vulnerable people. And so when you consider that the government came in saying that they were going to fix housing, build 100,000 houses in 10 years and all that, absolute twaddle, what they then proceeded to do was to make it really hard for someone to be a landlord, and particularly a landlord taking a risk to take on as a tenant a person with a background that might make them suggest that they might be a little bit risky. And so they just changed the rules, and that made it really hard for people to want to be landlords, and then they went after the landlords on tax and on basically turning them into a group that you could hate in this country. And so you've got a whole lot of people saying, I can't be bothered being a landlord now, it's too hard, I can't deduct interest, I'm the only business where I can't deduct the cost of my business. And we wonder why the state house waiting list has gone from 5,000 to over 24,000 families.
Jeez, that's big numbers.
5 years.
Yeah.
It's just shocking.
Yeah. Nobby, do you have a Loafers Lodge in Invercargill or a number of them?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, big, large ex-hotels that are accommodating people in that area of our community. But look, Judith is absolutely right about the landlords. I'm one of those. I've just sold my rental property because the compliance costs were too high. The inflation rates have pushed the rents, the costs from the bank up too high. I can't recover it. I can't write anything off. The bright line just makes it so hard for people to make a decent profit on it. So the downside of that is that the rental markets are now getting squeezed to the margins. And I hear some landlords are just actually not renting their properties, they're just sitting on them. And so that's not helpful either. So, yeah, but we do have one. Yeah, we do have one significant one in the middle of town.
Does it have sprinklers, Nobby?
I'm going to find that out in the next couple of days. It sounds like, from what we heard on TV recently, that there's not a high compliance need for these. And if you're not high-rise or you're not overly intense, you can get away with not having sprinklers. I just don't understand that, given the nature of the
Well, those are the rules, and it was in compliance with the rules, you know. And Nobby, it's kind of ironic. You've just said, the cost of compliance for a landlord in the Bright Line test. Well, if everyone came along and said every house in New Zealand has to have a sprinkler system, that's not going to help your case there, is it?
It's not. But then, if you listen to what Judith said, she raised a really good point. When you have people in these tense environments that have mental health issues, that have homelessness, that have drug and alcohol, that have low income, that will cook over a wee stove because they can't afford what you and I would have by way of food. These people create risks when you put them together. And so you can't compare them with a one-off rental property. So she's quite right. They're vulnerable, and in some ways we might be making them more vulnerable by not having sprinklers.
Does Papakura have a Loafers Lodge, Judith?
Not really, and because we've never really had big hotels. So I know what the sorts of places that Nobby's talking about, that tends to be what happens to them now. But we certainly have a lot of motels filled with people in the so-called emergency housing. A lot of state housing as well, and a lot of issues around some of the bad behaviours that the housing agency, Kāinga Ora, puts up with, and then their neighbours have to put up with it.
This seems to me, and I think Loafers Lodge, and it's a tragic way to put the spotlight on it, there has been, and you mentioned it earlier, and I think David Seymour mentioned in our last interview, lawlessness, and certainly the emotive feeling of a breakdown in society, that really we're in some sort of trouble. And I look at the emergency housing or the transient housing issue, and this all seems to have slipped and been created and gone downhill over the time of COVID, that we somehow lost our way a little bit on a whole lot of things, Nobby and Judith. A whole lot of basics in our society, basic values seem to have been eroded.
Well, classic examples are the ram raids, and the lack of an implication or an outcome for somebody who does a ram raid. Back in my days, you'd end up in Borstal for 9 months. Why don't we have detention centres where these young offenders who just get a wet rag or a bus ticket over their hand and they're out in the street a day or two later? Why aren't they locked up somewhere for 3 months before they go to court? And that gives them some consequences for their behaviour, because at the moment there seems to be nothing. We can talk all day about whether you can discipline children, whether teachers are able to discipline unruly kids at school. I mean, the list just goes on. And our society sort of disintegrates in many ways, I think. And certainly we've seen that in the ram raids and some of the other crime that we're getting.
Judith, is this all indicative of a wider malaise?
Yes, and I'm not going to blame COVID on it, because I think it was starting before that. It's very important, though, that we've lost this concept from government and those who tell us what we should be thinking, that we have to be responsible for our actions, and that actions have consequences. And Nobby's saying exactly right, which is basically if you let younger people and others think that there are no consequences to their actions, then they'll continue to do those. And you've got ram raids all over, particularly around Auckland and Hamilton. And certainly I've been to see some of the people who have been the victims of it. These are people trying to make a living and they're complying with the law, and they just get attacked and targeted. Well, one of the things I'd really love to see as a former police minister, I'd really like to see more police officers actually out on the beat. And it was something that I used to insist on when I was the minister. You just don't see it now, and it becomes sort of police-free zones because, and Labor keeps telling us that they've got more police officers. Well, where the hell are they? I'm not seeing them.
Yeah, I hear you. Guys, we're going to have a quick commercial break. I like commercial breaks. They pay my wages. And then we'll be back. I want to have a look at the Gore, the situation in Gore, and my friends at the Disinformation Project. All right, you are on the platform. Sean Plunket here with the Information Project through to 10 o'clock. And it's Free Speech Fridays. We've got National MP Judith Collins and the Mayor of Invercargill, Nobby Clark, with us. Well, Nobby, let's turn our focus down to your neck of the woods. And in the old days, it would have been a gunfight between the town clerk and the Mayor of Gore. Ben Bell, though, the youngster, the young'un, has emerged victorious, has he not?
Well, he has, and I think the public spoke. I mean, they turned out in their droves to say, hey, we voted this guy in. He's young. He's charismatic in many ways, probably lacking a bit of political skill at that level, but he's learning through the hard way. But there are three sides to this equation. Ben's one of them, the mayor. Steve Perry, the chief executive, is another side of the equation, and certainly the bulk of his councillors are another side.
All right. Well, they have gone. They have gone. Perhaps they've seen which side their bread's buttered on when the locals turn up and say, "Leave the kid alone." Yep, so they're on Ben's side now, aren't they?
Well, they withdrew some actions. One of them was a
vote of no confidence. Yeah.
But as Judith knows, those things are just a political statement. That's all they are. They mean
do you agree with
nothing.
Nobby? Your political allies are never to be trusted.
Well, what suits them? Look, I have been watching this from afar, and I hesitate to get myself involved in the deep South politics. But I am going to say this: from what I could see, it looked like a classic case of bullying of a young man who got elected on a platform of change and shaking things up. And yes, as Nobby says, inexperience, learning the ropes, but actually, how about giving him a chance? And it just looked awful, frankly. And I think, if you're elected by the people, no matter what a chief executive or anyone else thinks, too bad. You're elected by the people and you've got to do your job. Yeah. As for the council, might I suggest they get in behind him, help him to do his job, and actually be a great united team.
Yeah. Isn't it true, though, guys, and you're both very good people to ask about this, we seem to have codified the role of our politicians, particularly local body politicians, and councils have got up to come up with 3 years plans and 5-year plans and follow this code and that code and be exclusive. It's almost like the bureaucrats have tied the people's representatives themselves up in red tape so that they cannot express the will of the people through their actions or policies, Nobby.
So you're right on that score, and it's at both local and national level. From my observation, I've been in the government sector as well. So you're right. Often local body politicians are seen as rubber stamps. They just rubber stamp whatever the staff put up to them by way of papers. That's not a good way to do business. I certainly don't do that. And so I've made a rod for my own back a few times, but we've got some really good stuff going on in Invercargill with that change. But certainly at the national level, Judith will tell you, if you're a minister, you're only as good as the chief executive of your department's ability to deliver what you want.
Yeah.
Well, what you do need to do as a minister is send a very strong message of what you're prepared to accept and how you're going to judge your chief executive's performance. So it's not about just taking it. It's actually about being very clear. And you see weak ministers who just are just taken along like on a flood and have got no ability to make any difference.
But Judith, you have operated at the highest level of government in this country. Is there a natural tension? Is there a power struggle often between the top bureaucrats and the politicians?
Well, there can be, and so it's very important to make sure and very clear the expectations. I found with the government agencies that I've actually got on very well with them, and what they want is they want the minister to say, this is what our results are that we want, get out there, work out a plan as to how we're going to do them. Don't ask the agencies to tell you what they should be achieving. Get them to tell you how they're going to achieve what your outcomes are. And that's the big difference. And I think if you have, the status quo all the time, they just get used to pushing around politicians. So it's good to freshen things up. And Nobby, really hats off to you for the commitment and work and effort you put into your work, because I'm hearing great reports from my good friend Penny Simmons, a fabulous MP for Invercargill.
Nobby, do you talk to Ben? Have you given him a few words of advice? Invited him down to Invercargill for a beer?
I'm going to go back to what Judith just said, because it's also the same in the local government sector as well. Yeah. If you don't provide strong leadership and say to what you call bureaucrats, but to the staff, this is where we're going. Tell us how you can make it happen. Tell us about any potential roadblocks, but this is where we're going. This is point B and A to B. If you don't have that, they are then left in limbo, not knowing what to do on a day-to-day basis. So strong leadership is what it's all about. Yes, I have had some contact with Ben. I try to stay away a little bit, given that Invercargill was in exactly the same position a year and a half, 2 years ago, where we had a mayor and a chief executive and myself as deputy mayor that didn't get on. And without that sort of cohesion at the top, our council really struggled.
Yeah.
Terrible.
All right. Well, I do think it's up to locals and communities and everyone to work it out for themselves. Look, I just want to mention, either you're aware of this outfit, the Disinformation Project, who are called on by mainstream media constantly to call other people Nazis, people that the Labour government doesn't agree with. The Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet has just written a tender document that looks hand-built for the Disinformation Project to give them an advisory role to government. We've just heard this morning. Yeah, it's a $500,000.
I almost said a bad word on radio.
Did you almost say the F word in response to that?
I almost did, but I didn't. I mean, for goodness sake, okay, that'll be good to cut, won't it? I mean, there's some costs, there's some waste. For goodness sake, I mean, I've got to get going because the bells are ringing. I've got to go and speak in Parliament. But you know what? Disinformation, they are actually about disinformation, isn't it? Calling people out, attacking them. Where's free speech in this? And by the way, who are these people? I've never heard of them before. What are they? Next Labour Party?
Yep.
For me, there's also the Democracy Fund, which is the Labour $50 million a year that funds democracy media. I think that's an absolute raw. I've had to deal with one of those platforms, and we won't mention their name for political reasons, but they constantly dig up dirt, twist stories, and we've got examples, and I've got heaps of examples where the media makes the story themselves. They just keep adding rubbish to it, and the message gets totally distorted. And if you don't fight back, then you're deemed to be guilty. If you do fight back, they just continue to override you.
Judith, do we have to let you go?
Yeah, I've got to go.
All right, Judith, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, there's a post-budget debate going on. Nobby, it leaves me with you. Thank you. It's been a really good session. I just want to clear, you're not in a position, I take it, yet to talk about H&J Smith.
No, I'm not. What I've said publicly is, because I've had meetings with the management and the chief executive.
Yeah.
They have to work through a process with their staff, which is going to take 3 or 4 weeks. And anything I say that might cloud,
you don't want to get in the way.
That picture, I don't want to get in the way of that. So I'm just said that it's really sad after 123 years.
Yeah, it is indeed.
But I won't make any statement about the impact for the city or how we might be able to help the people that might be surplus until the companies work their way through that.
Yeah. Hey, Nobby, thank you. Always good to talk to you, mate. Take it easy. Thank you for your time this morning. So that was Nobby Clark, the Mayor of Invercargill, and Judith Collins, the MP for Papakura. That was a really good session. And I think Judith almost said the F word when we talked about the Disinformation Project. Sean, I do wish Judith was PM. We might actually get some decisions and real actions to address some of our problems, says Ian. Well, the National Party let themselves get spooked by the Liberal media, didn't they? And the National Party are so stupid about changing their leaders. Oh, we've got to change the leader because the media who hate us tell us that would be good for us. They never figure it out, the National Party, that every leader you're going to have is that the press gallery and the lefty journalists will say, oh, they're not good enough, there's a leadership coup. And they scare themselves into getting rid of perfectly good leaders. It's just so silly. Sean, can you check with Ben, did the government allocate any money for a Michael Jackson memorial in the budget? No. Ruben, stop ragging. Stop bantering on poor old Ben. That's not fair. Sean, Judith and Nobby read the Disinformation Project. How do they see the DP obtaining the information? Sorry, too late. They had to go. And I'd forgotten, actually, that, of course, the budget debate is on. Sean, classic. The Mayor, Tracy Hicks, saying on TV Monday morning that democracy sometimes needs protecting from itself. Classic left-wing Tracy Hicks. Love your show. That is from Craig and Gore. Good on you, Craig. Yes, I did ask Nobby about the closure of H&J Smith. Look, it was a really good session. In fact, it's been a hell of a show.